an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Shadow and Bone. Chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20. In these chapters, Mal and Alina try to escape. They don't. I have to admit, I did not see that one coming. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jaime for commissioning this episode. Jaime has been lamenting how difficult it has been for her to get some slots with me. Therefore, this is the first episode since December that I have done. And because Jaime is a co-host and personal friend, I made an exception. Otherwise, this would have had to be canceled. So... And also, I just want to finish it. I just want to know what happens. So Jaime is in the chat and says, thank you in all caps. Yay. Thank you, ma'am. These chapters were full of surprises. I really didn't think they were going to get caught, y'all. If you had asked me what I thought we were going to do, it was she's going to need to escape, find a way to get the thing, use it herself, and then they're going to create some sort of resistance front on their own while trying to fight the Darkling, who now realizes that they have the collar for themselves and is trying to, use some propaganda to make her look like the bad guy when really he's a bad guy. That's pretty much what I like. And it's so weird how expectations work, because you sometimes don't know you have them until things don't go the way you expected them to go. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I did think I knew what was going to happen here. So, all right, let's back up. Chapter 17 begins with Mal. And Mal is just, okay, look. Granted, I'm going to couch a lot of my opinions this episode in the fact that I haven't read since December. So there are going to be things that I don't totally remember. There is a moment later where he's like, so-and-so are dead. And I was like, ooh, Mal, I can tell by the way you said that is supposed to mean something to me and that it means something to her. And I don't remember who it is you're talking about. I'm assuming they are just friends of theirs from before she got captured. But in this opening, he just is basically real aggressive and irritable, and we still haven't, and this is something that just continues to bother me personally. He accused her of walking away into her new life without ever thinking about him. And she doesn't argue enough. She doesn't explain. Yeah, I was writing to you literally every day, waiting to hear back, and never did. So, and they never addressed that. I really thought that this section, when they are traveling together and there is so much time for them to talk, that Alina would get to explain to Mal, maybe they were being kept apart on purpose. He would start to realize oh, okay, I was sort of judging you based on what I thought was going on, but maybe I wasn't correct. I thought that there was going to be a lot more kind of coming to an understanding of each other's situations and empathy and just in general patching things up. And instead, neither of them ever addresses the fact that they were kept out of contact with one another, which was a major thing that he threw in her face when they last met up. So it irritated me that that's never talked about. I don't understand. If you got in an argument with somebody who accused you of something that is so incorrect and so kind of so much of a personal attack, wouldn't that be one of the first things that you do when you finally get a chance to talk to that person, is be like, hey, by the way, you asserted that I did XYZ, which you found real hurtful, and I did nothing of the sort. In fact, I did the opposite. And I just don't understand why that never comes up. That's just a huge deal to me. At the time when he like kind of throws that in her face, I was real irritated. And I don't know. Is that just me? It just kept on. I kept thinking, especially there's a point where she's like laying there like, I needed to tell him something and I didn't have the courage, or I hadn't done it yet, even though I'd had all kinds of chances. And I finally decided, and I was like, okay, so she's finally going to talk to him about writing to him, I guess. And then it's about a whole other thing, which, I mean, granted, I understand her feeling the need to like work up to asking him to kill her, but I thought it was going to be like, I have feelings for you and I wrote to you every day. Something like that. And it's just really like, it's just baffling to me that she doesn't bring this up herself. Jaime says they were just fellow soldiers. Alina wasn't close to them. She just knew them. I think she's being prideful about it. That's the thing, Jaime, though. If it's pride, when somebody accuses you of doing something you didn't do, I would think pride would make you protest and defend yourself. You don't need to be like, yeah, they were love letters. I was totally into you and I was wasting away not hearing from you and it was terrible. Just the pride of like, how dare you accuse me of some shit when I totally did not do that? Fuck you. You know, if it's just pride, then sure, that's still a reason. But so this is like one of the few things, because Leigh Bardugo tends to have her characters communicate in a way I approve of. Most of the other things that I've read of hers, people talk about what I want them to talk about and don't do this kind of thing. And I mean, I would want to know what exactly, if any, letters he got from me, because I want to know just how much they were keeping me away from him. It would be more than even just wanting to clear my name with him, but also wanting to know the extent to which they were meddling with my shit, you know? Like, how many times did he write to her? And what did he say in his letters to her that she never got? And I know now, after he talks to her at one point about how much he missed her and how guilt-ridden he was, that probably a lot of him lashing out when he finally sees her again is him missing her terribly and realizing that he has never actually appreciated her before, and then coming upon her looking happy with somebody else and being just jealous and angry about it. And that makes sense. But I would just, I would just be so curious, like, what he felt so guilty and was writing to her. What was he saying? Did he profess his love? Will she ever get a letter? Like, will she find a stack of letters that were never handed over to her at some point? So anyway, chapter 17, when we come back to the two of them, Mal is still fucking salty, and he just stays like this for a few chapters. He winds up warming up. They get robbed, which weirdly does a lot to sort of clear the air between them. I kind of understand that. That happens sometimes where, like, you're on, I don't even want to say bad terms with somebody, although it is bad terms in this case, but things will be tense between you and another person. And what it takes is some, like, third party outside event to break the two of you out of this, like, chill refusal to speak to one another, or to, continue treating each other with like this aloof politeness. And I rather liked that scene, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So he's asking her, his first thing he just says is talk. And she says the Darkling plans to use the Shadowfold as a weapon. And Mal's just like, yeah, okay, how? She says he didn't even blink, which, I mean, he wouldn't. Now that he has started to piece together how valuable she is and what's going on with her, it's obvious that, like, the Darkling is not a good dude, and there is something, he's a megalomaniac. So if he's after her and he's willing to commit all of these resources to do it, it's a big bad. And she says, Agrisha has to earn an amplifier. The same thing is true for the stag, but it was never meant for me. It was never meant for me. I'm curious what that means. Is this something that I should remember? I'm going to ask that a lot this episode, by the way. Why does she think it was never meant for her? Does she think that it was meant for... No, because he has an amplifier, right? The Darkling already has one. Is it a bear? But yeah, Mal interrupts her at this point and just like basically shoves some food in her hands and is like, come on, we're going to keep moving. And what follows is a ton of grueling climbing and walking that it's really hard for her to keep up with, but she's too proud to like tell him to fucking slow down. Also, there's an urgency here. So I think a part of her recognizes that despite the fact this is really difficult, she kind of has to if she wants to fucking stay alive here. So he then tells her that she shouldn't have listened to Bagra. And sort of like the point is that Bagra had told her to try and get to the fold first, I guess. And he's like, well, I mean, he's still going to be able to find you. He says it's just a question of time. And she's, you know, thinking to herself, what other choice did she have? Like, she was trying to help me, and other than just kill me, which might have been the smart thing to do, to be honest, what else was she supposed to send me off to do? So let's see. Around noon, we descended the first slope and started up the second, which was, to my misery, even steeper and taller than the first. I couldn't lose the feeling that I doomed both of us. The Darkling needed me alive, but what might he do to Mal? I'd been so focused on my own fear and my own future that I hadn't even given thought to what Mal had done or what he'd chosen to give up. He could never go back to the army, to his friends, to being a decorated tracker. Worse, he was guilty of desertion, maybe of treason, and the penalty for that was death. So, Alina's doing... Look, I'm not mad at her for this. But y'all are going to start to get real knee-jerky when I say this, and just keep in mind, I'm going to explain myself. Alina's getting a little Bella Swan on me right here. Because, yes, Mal saved her just now. But Mal's been a huge dick and hasn't explained himself in a lot of ways. And he chose to do everything that he has done. And she's over here just being like, I can't believe he did this for me. Everything he gave up. And I'm just like, bitch, he's an adult. He decided that he wanted to help you. And you just got to stop with this like martyr. Oh my God, I've ruined his life kind of thing. Knock it off. I have no tolerance for it. The next Twilight episode, Miles and I like have a bit of a moment because Bella goes back to herself, even though she has turned by the point we're reading at. So he tells her that then at this point, I had forgotten that this wasn't already a foregone conclusion. They go to like make camp for the night. They eat a meager dinner of hard cheese and stringy dried beef. I will say she keeps complaining about hard cheese, and I'm just such a big fan of hard cheese. Can't relate. Sorry. And he tells her that he wants to go to Sibea and find the stag, which I don't know if that was like kind of hinted at before, but I had it in my head already. That's what they were doing. So when she's startled by this, I was like, girl, of course, come on. You think he's going to let the fucking Darkling go and find this shit and then track you down? No. So she says, well, maybe the Darkling's already found it. And Mal says, no, he's still out there. I can feel it. And I'm real curious what this deal is, because there's something about what Mal can do that feels a teeny tiny bit magical. Like he just seems to have this inkling about where it is that's like more than just being good at tracking. And the connection that she has to the stag when she looks into its eyes, there's something more to it, I feel. I don't know. But I'm getting ahead of myself here again. So let's see. She says, what if the Darkling finds us first? And he says, you can't spend the rest of your life running. You said the stag could make you powerful enough to fight him. Maybe. Then we have to do it. If he catches you, he'll kill you. I know. All saints, Mal, why did you come after me? What were you thinking? I didn't think. We were halfway to Sabea when we got orders to turn back around and hunt you, so that's what I did. The hard part was leading the others away from you, especially after you basically announced yourself in Rivust. And then she says, and now you're a deserter. And he says, yes. And she says, because of me. And he says, yes. And I'm like, okay, now he's Jacob Blacking this shit. Now he's like, oh, yeah, you've basically ruined my life, but I love you anyway. He doesn't say I love you here, even though that's clearly what's happening. But I was a little bit like, no, not because of her, because of you. You love her. That was your choice. Stop it. He's letting her feel guilty for a thing. Everybody just to take responsibility for their shit. Stop it. And he says, I'm not afraid to die, Alina, but I'd like to give us a fighting chance. We have to go after the stag. So we have the brutal pace that he sets and his grim silences, as she puts it. I wanted to know how he'd ended up tracking the stag for the Darkling and what his life had been like for the last 5 months, but my questions were met with terse one-word replies, and sometimes he just ignored me completely. I worried Mal regretted his decision to come after me. I worried about the impossibility of finding the stag in the vastness of Sabea, but more than anything, I worried about what the Darkling might do to Mal if we were captured. So they finally begin to descend out of the mountains, and they build a fire for the first time in days, which she's super duper excited about. I love the detail that she summons some light in order to set the fire, and Mal just is not really impressed with it. Later on, when they are kind of back on more of speaking terms, she does it again, and he does say something about how kind of wondrous it is. But right now, he's still cranky. So he's kind of like, yeah, whatever. He doesn't really want to address it or acknowledge it. So they have to go down into a hunting village to restock because they're running out of food and everything. And Mal's real nervous about it. He goes down and comes back after a bit and says that it's kind of weird that he grabbed some stuff out of an unlocked house and left some coins behind. But he says the houses are all empty. I don't know what's going on. It was sort of eerie. And she suggests that maybe it's Sunday and that they're at church. And then he goes and climbs a tree and looks down there, and he comes back and says, there are people everywhere. They're walking on the road, and I can see the dumb cart, which I don't know what that means. What the word dumb means. I guess it's the cart of whoever's in charge. Because this is sort of the way this works is that people are sort of vassals, right? And there are, the dude that they lived with for a while, the Duke, would be in charge of his area. So the cart is just because it belongs to him would probably be called that. I'm guessing. But yeah, it's Butter Week. She is able to put this together. And it says, in the week before the spring fast, every nobleman was expected to ride out among his people in a dom cart, a cart laden with sweets and cheeses and baked breads. The parade would pass from the village to church all the way back to the noble's estate, where the public rooms would be thrown open to peasants and serfs who were fed on tea and blini. The local girls wore red sarafan and flowers in their hair to celebrate the coming of spring. So this sounds kind of like Fat Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, because that happens right before Lent, right? Or is Fat Tuesday after Lent? I know it's in response to fasting and self-deprivation, but I don't remember what direction it's in, whether it's beforehand so that you can get your gut stocked up on stuff before you cut everything out of your diet, or if it's for afterwards to celebrate the fact that you're not fucking doing that shit anymore. But that's kind of what this sounds like, because she says it's before the spring fast, and Lent happens before Easter. So similar idea. And she says that the Butter Week was the best time at the orphanage, which I'm over here forgetting that she's in the position of living in the house with the Duke. And so when she first says living at the orphanage, I'm thinking like, well, it's not with the Duke, but it's under care of the Duke. I'm thinking that like, oh, I'm going to remember being out and being in the crowd that's handed stuff. But her memories are of being on the cart and handing things out to other people and feeling like nobility after she does it, which I think is pretty cool. And she asks Mal, can we go look? Let's see. Jaime says, I think it's before Lent. Megan agrees. Mardi Gras is after Fat Tuesday, right? Mardi Gras means Fat Tuesday, doesn't it? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Megan says this is same as Fat Tuesday. Because gras is fat. Hence foie gras. So she asks if we can go look. And Mal, kind of against his better judgment, agrees. Because, and this is one of those things that like, there's a part of me that wants to be real irritated with this, that they like are willing to risk themselves just for a like fun town festival. But another part of me was like, she says, I could see the caution was wrestling with some of our happiest memories from Karamzin. And I sort of thought about it like the way, almost like in Deathly Hallows, when Harry and Hermione like forget that it's Christmas and then they hear people singing in the church, and how everything has been really tough and they felt so isolated, and they take a bit of a risk going to the cemetery, partially because they don't have other options at that point. But there was a part of me, even though I know that the two of them are in danger, that was like, oh man, I wish you could like go to the church and see the tree and like have a nice little Christmas. It's not smart. It's not cautious. But when you're going through a bad time, you just want anything that makes you feel a little bit better. As this fucking crisis that we're in right now wears on. I mean, right now I am looking at, so I did a thing that was probably not smart myself, re my stimulus money. I'm sorry about that noise. I bought myself an iPad. It's a bottom tier iPad. It was like $280, but I just wanted something for fun and to not be super responsible because things have been super terrible. And was this like the smartest way to spend my money? No. Should I probably have put this towards paying down a credit card? Likely. It wasn't my whole check, obviously. It was $270. But nevertheless, I know that there have to be articles and fucking Facebook posts and stuff out there about caution and like the big picture and long-term views of what to do. And I get it. And maybe that is smarter, but man, you need a little, this is like the same argument that people make about like, if you're broke, that you shouldn't be spending money going out for coffee and stuff. And it's like, yeah, if you're broke, your life is already really fucking hard, and begrudging somebody going and buying a fucking cup of coffee, they're not broke because they occasionally indulge in small things. They're broke because our system is garbage. Anyway, I'm getting off track. I wanted to be mad at them for deciding to do this, but I just couldn't. I get it. I really get it. So she darts into the crowd, and there's some dude who's real drunk handing out bread. It's a sweet roll. And she goes back to Mal, and I really enjoyed this little moment. She kind of like, he gets mad at her for doing this and going to get one. And she basically does oh, well, if you don't want any, I mean, that's fine. He's like, no, I mean, I didn't say that. Well, I mean, you did kind of say that, so I'll just eat it. It's fine. And he calls her a brat. And then he begins to try and grab it from her, but she's able to like dart and dodge out of his way because she's been fucking training and she's strong now. So he previously could have taken her down real easy, grabbed that role, no problem. And he goes into this thinking he's dealing with the same Alina. Not so, sir. And he looks genuinely startled and is like, what's going on here? And they get interrupted by a couple of people who hold a knife to both of their throats. And it turns out they are robbing them. It's a great moment because Alina thinks they're caught. And then when she realizes they're just here to fucking mug them, she's like, oh, and she starts cracking up, which the thieves assume that she's a bit simple, as they put it, and kind of leave her alone to go after Mal, who they believe, since she's simple, he's probably got a hold of the money and anything that's valuable. Unfortunately, they do get a hold of the rifle and the wool blanket, which, as somebody who enjoys creature comforts, losing that wool blanket, just a real hardship. Don't care for that. So then they take a look at the pack that Mal has opened to, show them what's in it. And they realize that it's military issue. And this is when Alina's like, fuck. Because she really thought, oh, they'll just rob us and then we'll be done. Not so. They begin to put together, if this is a military issue pack, Mal is maybe the deserter that they heard about. Because apparently fucking news travels. And these two, and by these two, I do not mean these guys. I mean Mal and Alina. They don't kill these dudes. Which, I guess, but you should have. Because they leave and she asks, do you think they're going to tell them what happened? And do you think they'll say anything? And he says, of course, they'll see if they can get some coin for the information. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad at you for not wanting to take a human life. But let's be honest here. These dudes are out in the crowd robbing folks. I'm not real cut up if they wind up biting it. Maybe they just deserve to not be around anymore. And they're about to be a massive threat to you and basically result in Alina being enslaved. Maybe just kill them. It's fine. But, that's me. I get that way. I get a little murderous here and there. You just have to sort of roll with it. So she uses her mirror to blind them because one of them has a hold of her hand, but then eventually lets go. He has her wrist, I think. And she uses the mirror to blind a couple of them. She slams a knee into one of their balls and the other guy is no, it's the same guy. He goes doubled over because she kneed him in the balls. And when he does that, she grabs his head and knees him in the face and breaks his nose. Satisfying. More satisfying would have been to kill him. But if we're just going to get the one, I guess breaking his nose is pretty good. So yeah, Mal is able to escape from the other guy and then they run off and realize that our cover is kind of blown. They're going to figure us out, that this was us passing through pretty quickly, which sucks, which means that the Darkling is going to put together that they are after the fucking antlers now and not heading for the fold. And I do enjoy the conversation they have because he asks her, where did she learn to do that? And because, again, he's not used to seeing her being able to fight and defend herself. And she says, Grisha training, ancient secrets of the groin kick. Botkin always says, not showy, just to make pain. And Mal says, whatever works. And then he gets real I shouldn't have taken us into town. It was stupid. I should have known better. And not really intending to make light of it. She pulls the roll out of her pocket that's all smushed up and has lint on it now. And is I still have the roll. And he loses his shit laughing. And this goes on for a little while where he starts laughing, and then he says something like, "That better be one hell of a roll." And then a little bit later, after they've eaten it, he's like, "That roll was pretty fucking good, actually." And I just really enjoyed this moment of breaking the tension of the two of them kind of reconnecting in a way that feels like friends again. And they do finally eat it. And yeah, like I said, he says that was a really good roll. And they walk until dusk. And when they finally make camp, at first he's like sleeping somewhere off to the side, but then he comes and lays down with his back to her so that they can stay warmer. And it's sort of a signal that like his aloofness is at an end and that they are friends again. And I just really like the fact that she's like, you know, yeah, we had a real bad day. Our cover's blown. We were almost killed. We lost a rifle. We lost a blanket, but we're friends again. And that's pretty good. So then we go to chapter 18, and they're heading north still. And reminder that this is real early spring. So as they head north, it's less and less spring-like and much more traveling back in time towards winter. And Mal begins to admit that even though he feels like he shouldn't have let them go into the village, it probably was a good idea because he was able to pick some stuff up that they really needed. And they aren't able to light fires as they go further up. So they need to depend on the food that he was able to buy that can be, you know, just carried without going bad. And she tells him about how like the Grisha all think that the king is garbage. And he says something about how the trackers had been grumbling more and more loudly amongst themselves about the king's incompetence. So it is an open secret that the king doesn't know what he's doing, but nobody really can do anything about it. He is who he is. He is in the position of power, and that's that. And he talks about how the Fjerdans have these weapons that are actually really impressive, and that if the king was at all interested in educating himself on weaponry, he could make sure that the army was equipped with weapons good enough that they don't have to be entirely dependent on the Grisha to fight for them. But he's then immediately like, well, the Darkling needs them dependent. So I guess, you know, we understand why he isn't taking an interest in weapons and stuff. Like somebody is making sure that he is ignorant of all of that and doesn't see the danger of being dependent on the Grisha. So, and Alina, for her part, she doesn't know what happened and still hasn't really gotten the full story out of him. She has asked a couple times about, you know, what happened to him, about his time tracking the stag, and he just keeps sort of changing the subject and not really answering her question. And eventually, she gets up the courage to tell him that if it comes to a point where it looks like the Darkling is going to get her, he needs to kill her rather than let her be taken. He gets real upset and says no several times. And she kind of has to be like, dude, if he gets that collar around my neck, I'm literally going to be like a slave to him. I can't do that. I don't want to live like that. And he is going to make me do things that I won't be able to live with. I will be responsible for things that happen. Don't put me through that. Just kill me. And he promises, but then he falls away from that promise. The moment that, which comes in the very next chapter, that he's put to the test, he can't do it. And granted, in the end, I'm sure it will turn out to be a good thing that he didn't. But at this moment, when you see that he's just letting her be enslaved instead, I was just like, dude, that's fucked up. I guess he assumes he'll find a way to like save her eventually. But yikes. So he's sort of trying to sense the herd as he had been doing earlier. And he has a feeling about them finally and kind of gets her up in the morning, and they don't even take time to eat breakfast. They eat while they're walking. And he's talking about the variety of ways that he could kill her. He says something about how, like, we have to find the stag so I don't have to chop your head off. And she's like, I was thinking more of like a nice poison. He's like, well, I mean, I could run you through with a sword. I could get a firing squad. pretty dark humor. I enjoyed that. And he keeps on like feeling like, I know where they are. I think I've got it. And they sit down somewhere, and he's like poised and ready all afternoon going into dusk. And finally starts to be like, man, I was really sure. I don't understand where they are. What the fuck? So she conjures some light to warm them. And he argues about it for a second before admitting that they will die if they don't have some heat here. So they need to do this. And this is when he blurts out that Mikhail is dead. And so is Dubrov. And she says, I'd never liked Mikhail or Dubrov, but none of that mattered now. Which, I mean, fair. It would have been pretty funny, though, if she was just like, oh, really? God, I never really liked those guys. Oh, well, what are you going to do? He's finally opening up, and she's like, win some, lose some. And he says that they were up north near the permafrost and had hunted the stag almost all the way into Fjerda. And the issue is they can't cross the Fjerdan border. That's not... They basically be poaching, right? So they can't unless they disguise themselves and pretend to be Fjerdans and then cross the border. And they can't even kill the stag and carry it back over the border. They have to somehow capture it and bring it back with them. The whole idea of it is so foolish, but he still volunteers to do it. And he says that he volunteered to do this because she saved his life. And she starts to say, and you saved mine. But he continues talking, and basically what he says is that he cannot stop thinking about the fact that he watched her be led away and did nothing to stop them. It was just him standing there twiddling his fingers, letting them capture her. And she's like, rightfully like, I mean, what could you have even done though? You were surrounded by like, come on. And his answer is just something. I could have done anything, but I did nothing. And he says, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept seeing you walk away. I kept seeing you disappear. And he says that he thought if he got the stag and found the herd, that somehow he could help her. Mikhail didn't know any of that, but he was my friend. So like an ass, he volunteered too. And then, of course, Dubrov had to sign on. I told them not to, but Mikhail just laughed and said he wasn't going to let me get all the glory. 9 of us crossed the border, 6 soldiers and 3 trackers. 2 of us came back. So yeah, pretty brutal. And, you know, again, he doesn't go into detail here because he's got a scar on his face that she keeps wondering, how did he get that? Did that happen when he was trying to track the stag? And he isn't forthcoming with the details about any of this. So it might be, it might not. We might find out a whole other story later. But he's telling her more than he did, and she's just kind of holding on to that as evidence that they are getting back to themselves, you know. And then says it was all for nothing. The herd crossed back into Ravka when the weather turned. We could have just waited for the stag to come to us. Which that is probably the part of the story that's the hardest, is that they did all of this, and it turns out it was just a matter of patience. If they had just chilled, they would have come, and there would have been no need to sacrifice these people. And he feels that he got his friends killed because they wouldn't have volunteered if it wasn't for him. And she has to tell him, look, you are saying, because she says, I'm sorry, Mal. And he finally says, it's not your fault. I made my own choices. So he walks back what he says to her initially because he's still mad at her. And then she kind of has to like turn that around on him because he says, I made my own choices, but those choices got my friends killed. And she's like, okay, look, if you say that you made your own choices and it was your responsibility, then that has to apply to them too. They're adults. And if they heard you talking about them, they wouldn't appreciate you acting like they just were a couple of children who followed you around. They would want you to fucking fly just flew into my eyeball. They would want you to give them the fucking courtesy of seeing that they made choices, informed choices, knowing the risks, and decided to do what they were going to do. And she says at one point, chapter 19 starts, and it says, my light kept us warm through the night in the lee of the rock. Okay, so this brings up some things for me. She can be unconscious, and this light is still lit, which is bonkers. Like, really? That's a big deal. I mean, there are precious few mythologies or universes in which you have magic that continues to do its thing, other than if you place that magic into a magical object. But I'm like, it says, sometimes I dozed off and Mal had to nudge me awake so I could pull sun across. Oh, I guess she doesn't completely fall asleep. Okay. Oh, yeah, and Jaime says that. It says she starts to doze off and it goes out and Mal has to wake her up, though, doesn't it? You're right. Okay, I misread. I've read that, like, first sentence, and for some reason, the part that says sometimes I dozed off, I misread it and was like, at some time I dozed off, and forgetting that, you know, he is having to bring her back. Okay, because I was about to be like, that is a little bit overpowered, but okay, cool. So she does have to be conscious. And when they wake up, everything has been snowed on. And it says, this far north, snow was common well into spring, but it was hard not to feel that the weather was just another part of our bad luck. Man, if that isn't the truest thing, you can know that something's pretty normal. But when it happens to you when shit's already going wrong, you just still take it fucking personally. You know, you're just like, man, come on. And Mal is just disgusted because if there had been any tracks of the herd to follow, the snow has covered them up. And now the two of them are going to leave a fucking wide swath of footprints and shit behind them as they travel. He can try and cover them up, but it's not going to be easy to do, and you won't be effective enough to really fool any tracker with experience. So they basically start off the day knowing that they are under the gun now, and it's very likely that they've got like a day or two before somebody catches up with them. It's bad news. And they get to this spot when they're walking together where he finally stops and he apologizes for what he said at the palace. And then he says, and I'm sorry for everything else. And she says, I knew we didn't have much chance of finding the stag, because she thinks he's like, I'm sorry for failing you, bringing you on this sort of quest, and we're not going to do it. But he's like, not for that. When I came after you, I thought I was doing it because you saved my life, because I owed you something. Now, I don't know what to think. I just know everything is different. That night at the palace when I saw you on that stage with him, you looked so happy. I can't get that picture out of my mind. And she admits, I was happy. I finally had found a place that I felt like I belonged, that I was good at things. I was healthy for the first time in my life. Like, yeah, I was happy. I didn't know what the fuck was going on, though. So, you know, yeah, that'll happen. And she says, I never really belonged anywhere. And he says, you belonged with me. And she says, no, Mel, not really. Not for a long time. And this is when he says, did you miss me when you were gone? And I'm like, talk about the letters. Fucking do it. I just really thought when she says, every day I missed you, I was like, and you wrote him every day. The fact that they don't talk about this drives me bonkers. They have a whole like conversation about their feelings, but they fail to even talk about something like this. So then he says, and this is hilarious, I missed you every hour. And you know what the worst part was? It caught me completely by surprise. I'd catch myself walking around to find you, not for any reason, just out of habit because I'd seen something I wanted to tell you about or because I wanted to hear your voice. And then I'd realize that you weren't there anymore. And every single time, it was like having the wind knocked out of me. And I just really, like, this is just so funny to me because I've never been that type of person that isn't highly aware of how I feel about somebody. The idea of like kind of being in love with a person, but not grasping that that's what's going on until they're gone. No, I can't relate. Like that's just not how I work. So the fact that he doesn't get it until she's not there anymore and then begins to realize like, fuck, I didn't understand what I had. Honestly, in a lot of ways, this feels like a uniquely male trait. And I know that women do this too. But men really do tend to take women for granted. And the I didn't know how good I had it until she was gone is something that you say, like you hear men say about their relationships with women a lot. So yeah, he says, I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, but I see you now. And then he kisses her. And there's this moment where she's kind of like, oh shit, I really thought I was over this, but he's kissing me. And now I'm like, fuck. Nope, still in love with him. There it is. Yeah, okay, I guess this is happening now. And when they finally break apart, she sees movement in the corner of her eye. And the herd is right there. And there's the huge white stag in the center stepping out. So at this point, this is an interesting moment. Mal immediately pulls his bow and is like, all right, you got to kill it. And I'm like, really? I was so agitated at the fact that we're hearing this description of this magnificent beast of such rarity and beauty that then we have to fucking kill. You just need its antlers. How about you just use a little like knockout juice? I don't know, chloroform it, cut his little antlers off. You take off those antlers, leave him alive. Look, is it great for him to be left without his antlers? No, but you don't have to take the whole antler. Just take some pieces of the antler. Just do that. And she even says, she walks up to it and she knows that Mal is over here about to shoot it. And she says something about how like, we'll find another way. And she's looking at him thinking, and there's a part of me that can't help but wonder if the stag wasn't like drawn to her and Mal in the moment that they were like feeling love for one another, because there's something about this thing that feels sort of like mythical. I mean, it is, right? Like there was an argument about whether it even existed. But she says, I looked into the stag's dark eyes and knew the feel of the earth beneath his steady hooves, the smell of pine in his nostrils, the powerful beat of his heart. I knew I could not be the one to end his life. And then the poor thing gets shot because the darkling is right here watching. And the rest of this continues like a bad dream. It's like a fucking nightmare. Oh, Jamie's saying, I had a hard time reading the description of what happens to him the first time I read this. In order to make an amplifier, the Grisha has to kill it. I don't buy it. Look, I know that everybody says that. And it might even be true. But there's a part of me that's like, bet there's a loophole. Bet there's another way to do this. It's more powerful. Some other, like, maybe showing mercy would be granting you even greater power than killing it. Has anybody ever tried? But granted, it's awful because the stag is shot, and she even gets a chance standing over the stag that is now downed but still alive to kill it herself in order to try and escape this situation. And she can't do it. And similarly, Mal is supposed to put her out of her misery, and he can't do it. There's a brief like fight between the two of them where he's like sending darkness at her, and he says like the darkling, when she pushes the darkness back and uses this sort of bubble of light, he says something about how it's impressive, but you're not strong enough for this. And then starts to taunt her about how this boy probably doesn't know. Basically, you were totally willing to fuck me that one time. Does he know that you were just like so hot and bothered? Is he aware that I got you up against the wall that one time and you were panting? And she gets overcome with shame and her light begins to sort of dim. And this is when she tells Mal, you know what you have to do. And Mal is just like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And when he refuses, she like completely loses control of her light and the darkness just covers them. And the two of them get picked up. And again, I forgot about fucking fabricators. So even now, even that they're like both fucking caught up, I'm thinking, all right, well, I guess they'll have to bring them back to the palace, and we're going to have to do a whole thing, and we're going to have to, like, wait for the collar to get made and constructed with maybe some, like, I don't know, magical rites or... Nope. Sure don't. He fucking calls David, the fabricator, and David basically just comes up behind her. There's a couple of pieces of antler that circle around her neck, and he fuses them together to make a collar with no opening of any kind. It's a perfect, solid circle of bone around her neck. I mean, I'm sure if she needed to, she could find a way to get it off. Like, if the Darkling was dead, is what I mean. Like, that there would, you know, there's probably a way to remove it. But I would imagine it's probably pretty tricky. She'd probably need a fabricator to do it, or she'd need like a laser focused sunlight beam. And it's an awful, like, the whole way that this goes, he tells her to open her coat because she has to, you know, she's wearing like layers that go all the way up to her chin, and they need to get at her throat. They have to do this under her clothes. So there's an added layer of sort of humiliation of her having to like undress and expose herself and lift her hair out of the way so that they can do this. And I love the part where the Darkling is like moving her clothes out of the way for the fabricator, and she flinches when he touches her, and she sees him like get real angry for a second. And I just find that so precious. Like, oh, sweetie, does it hurt your well feelings that she doesn't like for you to touch her? You fucking psycho. Yeah, maybe. She doesn't want you to touch her. I know it's crazy. You jag. So, David finishes fitting the collar to her. No clasp, no hinge. And she, for a second, is like, I don't feel any different. Maybe it didn't work. Oh, maybe it didn't work. But then the Darkling touches her and she feels this command like inside of her that demands light. And light bursts completely outside of her control from her body. And she keeps trying to resist, and the mere idea of it dissipates the moment that she thinks it. Like he's in there like she's writing on a chalkboard and he's directly behind her with the eraser, just gone like it was never there. And he begins to say more, and there is light pouring out of her with a intensity that she has never managed by herself. And there's a note of this, and I love this. Normally when she was doing this sort of thing, she would feel a like elation at accomplishing something. But there's no exhilaration because it's not her. If anything, the Darkling might be feeling the exhilaration because he's the one in control of her. So it might be that he sort of has like gets that sensation. You know, I don't know how this works. And it's just a really awful moment. You know, it's robbing her of all agency. It's akin to a kind of a rape. And there's no way for her to resist this in any way. And when he finally lets go of her, she says, I drew a ragged breath, trying to get my bearings to piece myself back together. And that's the worst part to me, is the fact that like him doing this completely obliterates her ability to even think straight. And she has to take a moment to collect herself once it's over. So they burn the stag and like, you know, like can't even like butcher it and like, you know, they just have to burn it. Come on. Mal gets chained up and she gets basically babysat by Ivan. Oh, good old Ivan, who was the one who babysat her in the first place. And she tries to like talk to Ivan. She tries to get him to see things her way. And it's like, you know what he plans to do. And Ivan says he plans to bring us peace. At what price? You know, this is madness. To which Ivan is like, I had 2 brothers and they died fighting the king's wars. And so did my father. And so did my uncle. Everyone is so sorry for me. But the Darkling is the only one who will do something about it. And she tries to be like, my power could be used to destroy the fold. We could do something. And Ivan's like, he has a plan. He's smart. I trust him. He'll figure it out. He knows what needs doing. And she tries to be like, do you really think it's going to stop with me? Do you think I'm the only one that's going to be wearing a collar? Eventually, it'll be all of you. And he says to stop talking treason or he's going to gag her. And then he leaves her there. Eventually, and she keeps having like recurring nightmares about the stag, about the Darkling cutting its throat. Tons of guilt about everything that happened with Mal and the fact that she had the chance to kill the stag and didn't do it. There's just a lot of repetition, but I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, just, it's like a pattern of just like sleeping and nightmares and waking up and sleeping, and because they're traveling this whole time, back to the palace. What I found hilarious, it turns out nobody knows that she ran away. They constructed this whole story about how she's like going into isolation in order to prepare for this like big moment. And she thinks that like, you know, once they get her back, there's going to be this whole, I can't believe you ran off. But no, nobody even knows that. So, and she the whole time, by the way, does not know for sure whether Mal is still alive. He mentions at one point that if she acts up, he'll torture Mal, but she then wonders if if maybe he's just saying that because he's trying to keep her in line, but Mal's maybe already dead. And they come up with this story, like I said, about her being isolated. And sure enough, once she gets out of the carriage, the Grisha who see her are kind of like startled because they thought that she was going to be like triumphant, having mastered her art And when she gets out, she looks pale and drawn and tired. And it's just, obvious that something isn't quite right. But she has to play her part. And Genya comes to visit her after a couple of nights. And Genya is wearing red. And it takes a minute before Alina even notices this. It's the whole thing. It says, Genya was wearing corporalki red. Her cuffs were embroidered with a blue, a combination I had never seen before. What role had Genya played in the king's sudden illness? Because it turns out that the apparat is the one in charge now. And I maintain Alina was real creeped out by the apparat, and that might be for good reasons. But I had a feeling that the apparat wasn't as much of a threat as she thought, and I maintain that might still be true. And she asks Genya, do you know what the Darkling plans? And Genya says there are rumors. And this has to be done. David feels terrible. He thinks he's destroyed all of Ravka. It's not his fault. We all did our part to bring about the end of the world. For what it's worth, tell David I forgive him. And I forgive you too, I added silently. I meant it. I knew what it was to want to belong. I will, she said quietly. She turned and disappeared into the night, but not before I saw that her lovely eyes were full of tears. And that is the end of chapter 20. So Jaime has told me that the next episode, I'm going to be finishing this book. So we'll be going on into book 2 in just a couple of episodes. So yeah, it's going to be in June, I think. So it's going to be a little while before the next episodes, but they're coming. Jaime says not back to the palace, to the town outside the fold. Oh, okay, my bad. May 12th. Oh, okay, May 12th and then June 30th. Okay, so not, it's a while, but May 10th, June 30th, and then July 10th. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jaime. All right, guys. Well, I have to wrap. I'm over time, but thank you all again for hanging out with me. Thank you again, Jaime, for commissioning this one. I hope you guys are enjoying listening. And I'll be seeing you again in a little less than a month with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.